They're called tax inversions, and it's a growing trend. American companies moving their tax home to a nation with lower rates to save millions. President Obama calls it unpatriotic and is considering executive action to stop it. We'll have two experts on to debate the issue, but first, Fox Business Network's Peter Barnes explains how it works.
More U.S. companies are moving their headquarters overseas through mergers with foreign firms, which can save them a boatload in corporate taxes. Their top tax rate can drop from 35% in the U.S. to, on average, 20% overseas. House Democrats say 75 companies have completed so-called corporate inversions since 1994. Senate Democrats say as many as 25 more could do it this year alone, costing the Treasury more than $19 billion over the next decade. It's all legal under current U.S. tax law, which the president wants to change. But some Republicans say it's more an election year ploy to make inversions about economic patriotism and help Democrats in fall elections.
These accountants are saying, you know what, we found a great loophole. If you just flip your citizenship to another country, even though it's just a paper transaction, we think we can get you out of paying a whole bunch of taxes.
Senate Democrats are expected to hold a vote on inversion legislation when they return from their summer recess in September, but the measure is likely to die in the House. Chris?
Peter, thank you. Joining us now to debate this, the president of the Business Roundtable, former Governor John Engler, and Delaware Senator Chris Coons, who's on the Budget Committee. Gentlemen, welcome. President Obama is coming down hard on these companies that carry out these inversions, saying that they show a lack of what he calls economic patriotism. Take a look.
Right now, a loophole in our tax laws makes this totally legal. And I think that's totally wrong. You don't get to pick which rules you play by or which tax rate you pay, and neither should these companies.
Governor Engler, I fully understand that companies can save a lot of money by doing this and that it is legal, but is duty to shareholders, does that trump duty to country?
Well, they have to follow the law. And as the president said, they've been following the law. But what the inversion is an indication of how out of date our tax code is. We really haven't touched it in 30 years since the Reagan compromise back in the mid-'80s. And since that time, everybody in the world has been changing their tax code. We've now got a tax code that actually is more favorable to foreign headquartered companies than it is to our own. And we ought to have the tax code in the United States that's the best in the world that helps create the most jobs.
But I guess the question I'm asking you is, in the current system, with the current law, you don't have a problem with an American company doing this paper transaction to declare that it's an Irish company or a Swiss company to save millions of dollars?
Well, what we favor is a comprehensive reform.
I'm asking whether you have a problem with that, sir.
No, I have a problem with the tax code that's so outmoded and archaic that it's forcing these kinds of decisions. And what we're seeing today is the inability to compete the way we should. That's why job growth is less here. And we think that the comprehensive approach that's been proposed by Dave Camp, for example, is a good starting point.
Chairman of House Ways and Means. Let me bring in Senator Coons. Terms like unpatriotic, corporate deserter are powerful. But if you're the CEO of a company and someone comes in and says, hey, this is the law, and you can save hundreds of millions of dollars and give that back to your shareholders, what's wrong with that?
Well, they are following their fiduciary duty to advance shareholders' interests, but they're not following their duty as Americans, as folks to contribute to carrying their cost of the burdens of our country. You're an American headquartered company in this fact pattern because you're taking advantage of our intellectual property protection, our military, our schools, our universities, our research. And I do have a problem, and I think most Americans do, with the idea that we have a corporate tax code that's riddled with loopholes, that's badly out of date, and that's unfair. So I agree with John that the real solution here is to move to comprehensive tax reform so we have a more competitive tax system. But frankly, like the president, I have a problem with a mostly American company using a tax loophole to avoid paying their fair share.
But let's talk about that corporate tax code, because CEOs will say, fine, we'd love to stay in this country, but I have to pay a 35% top corporate tax rate here and a 12.5% top corporate tax rate, for instance, in Ireland. And you guys in Congress have talked about it for years and done nothing.
Well, first, let's give credit where credit's due. The president in the State of the Union this year called for reducing the corporate tax rate to 28% and engaging in comprehensive reform.
But nothing's happened, sir.
And we did get real and strong proposals from Chairman Camp and from Chairman Baucus. We do need to come together. Congress has a responsibility to deal with this issue. In the long term, in the next year or two, and in the short term, I hope we will take bipartisan action to deal with inversions. Because, as you said in the introduction, it could cost us 18 to 20 billion over the next decade. We are losing corporate headquarters, we're losing jobs, and we're losing resources.
Governor Engler, Democrats say they're willing to cut corporate taxes, but Republicans insist if you're going to do that, you also need to cut individual tax rates because so many of these companies file as individuals, the smaller companies, not in the corporate tax rate. Are you really going to hold up corporate tax reform to get the individual tax rate lowered?
No, I think you do business tax reform comprehensively without getting into individual rates. I don't
Even
think,
for companies?
Even for companies. I think you can approach this in a comprehensive way. That's what Chairman Camp attempted to do. He actually had a 25% rate for manufacturing companies, whether they were incorporated or not. I think that this is an opportunity for the president to lead. I think call maybe ought to be to Secretary Lew. Look, let's get Chairman Camp and Chairman Wyden, the respective relevant chairs, in a room over August and September. We can have something ready to go when we get back. Let's not spend the time at Treasury trying to come up with little fixes when we've got an opportunity to improve the competitiveness of the United States.
Well, let's talk about that because in the absence of any agreement on legislation, President Obama is in this area as well, talking about possibly taking executive action to stop tax inversions. What makes this particularly interesting is just last month, Treasury Secretary Lew said that was not possible. Take a look.
We do not believe we have the authority to address this inversion question through administrative action. If we did, we would be doing some more.
Senator Coons, that was just a few weeks ago. What's changed?
Well, the larger point here is that we should act in Congress, that the president would prefer Congress to act, and we should.
Why was it that in mid-July that the Treasury Secretary said he didn't have the power for executive action to stop inversions, and now the president says they do?
There are some technical areas where Treasury can continue to apply the impact of the 2004 law. Let me be clear on this point. In 2004, a Republican Congress and a Republican president joined with Democrats in the House and Senate to pass a law to address inversions as a problem when it was first emerging. There are provisions in that law that Treasury is looking hard at. They would prefer that Congress act in a bipartisan way, as they did a decade ago, to stem the job loss and stem the revenue loss. But in the absence of congressional action, I do think Treasury will step up and do something to stop the bleeding.
Let me just ask you directly. We're almost running out of time. Governor Engler, if President Obama and Treasury, if they take executive action, will you try to stop them? And you're a former politician, former governor. Isn't this a good political issue for Democrats? Because once again, they can say, we're on the side of the little guy, we're on the side of the Americans, and Republicans are on the side of the big corporation that's trying to save money by pretending they're Irish or Swiss.
I think that one thing Americans are tired of is all the political games in Washington that want a solution. I don't know. I think the clip you saw from the Secretary of Treasury, I think it's very hard. They can tweak, but why spend the time doing that? Why not fix the problem? And it's not a little problem. Our rate is 35%. Now, the whole inversion doesn't change the U.S. taxes on U.S. activities, and it doesn't change the foreign tax on the foreign activities. It only changes it when the company wants to bring the money home, and so that does impact. And we would suggest that we ought to put the focus on growth here, comprehensive plan. We ought to have the right regulatory energy policy, all that stuff too. But this is the most important thing you can do if you want U.S. growth to pick up and accelerate. Fix an outmoded tax code, modernize it.
Governor Engler, Senator Coons, we want to thank you both so much for coming in today. Obviously, this is going to be a hot issue, and it'll be interesting to see what the president does on his own and how much he's able to accomplish in this area of tax inversion. Thank you both, gentlemen.
Thank you.